Throughout the year, I model a ton of stuff, and something I've been wanting to do is create a furniture asset pack. That way I have like all the best meshes from all my past projects in a single folder somewhere that I can just grab whenever I need. So I'm going to be showing you how I made this asset pack. So this is partially like for me because I want it, and also partially for everyone else because I think people would like this pack. So this is just going to be me showing you how I create this asset pack, and this is how I package basically every project I work on. And I even the projects that I don't push out, I've been doing this just so that all the meshes and everything that I work with is easy to work with in Unity. So this pack is going to be something I put on my website, and it's going to be on Booth as well. But if you want a free version of it, I'll link that below. The free version is going to have something like 100 prefabs in it, while the paid version is going to have around 250. So this is me bringing in all the meshes from all the projects. So this is all these meshes are from folders that are located across several different hard drives or all over the place, and I'm pulling from like the past 10 projects or so. There's a lot of stuff here, and there's a lot of stuff that I need to organize. The main process that I'm going to be doing, or the main bulk of the work, is going to be number one, organizing all the meshes, and then figuring out where the textures are, moving the textures to a folder that I have access to, or I have easier access to, and then deciding what either needs to get retextured or deciding what I want to bake together. Because a lot of these meshes, I texture them as a part of an atlas with several other meshes, and I'm not going to be including all of those, and it may not make sense to have it atlas with those meshes in this pack. And so a big bulk of this work, and the big time consuming part of this work, is going to be me baking textures from a bunch of different meshes onto one single atlas. So step one is bring in all the meshes and then organize them. And once they're all organized and nicely grouped in the project, then I can go ahead, start looking at these groups of meshes and deciding what needs to be together, where the textures are, and organizing everything. I created a folder called Final Textures, and basically I would go to each mesh, determine if it needed to get baked or if I just needed to find the textures. For the things like the beds and the larger pieces of furniture, it was just a matter of, because those were kind of just atlas by itself, I just needed to find like where the textures were, move it over to my Final Textures, and that was basically it. The other thing I did with each mesh is I added a new UV map and I re-UV'd it for light maps. That way you don't have to depend on generating UV light maps in Unity. For the larger meshes like the beds and a lot of the other furniture pieces and something like the inflatables, they were all together, so finding those textures were pretty easy. The real time consuming stuff was the baking. A large portion of these meshes did need to get baked, either together or separately. For a lot of this, I tried to make it so that each mesh has its own texture, but for a lot of this stuff, like especially the smaller stuff, I have an urge to atlas it together with a bunch of stuff because it feels like a waste to, like when I have 10 vases, I really feel like you don't need 10 different textures for all those vases. You can just kind of group it all together. So with things like that, I grouped it all together, but most of these did need to get baked onto a new atlas. The way you bake things together is you need to make a new texture in Blender, and then you use cycle rendering mode, which is where the bake features are in Blender, to bake that information on the new texture that you make. So in your node editor, you create new nodes for your new texture, make sure it's selected, create a new UV map for the new UVs that you're going to be using, then bake onto that new texture that you made. I do that for like every texture that the meshes will need, so like metallic, roughness, normals, the base color. So these are all the meshes that are going to be exported out. I've organized and baked everything. All the textures are organized. So if you look here, here's my furniture or my Final Textures folder. So you can see everything's organized and it's numbered, and it should be pretty easy to figure out what goes where because the names for everything should correspond with the textures. But yeah, basically I just need to export each one of these out individually and import them into Unity. And the way I do that is I make sure the origin points on all the meshes are somewhere that makes sense. So like for most of these objects, it's going to be like where the object hits the ground at. And once the origin point is set, I move the object to 0, 0 and export it out individually. And then I'll bring that into Unity. Obviously, that's going to take a minute because there's literally hundreds of meshes here. But once that's done, I can bring it into Unity and then set up each mesh to be a prefab in here. And that's another tedious step, but it's the final step. So basically, I just grabbed I exported everything out. I grabbed the FBX files, brought them in, brought all the texture files from that final textures folder, and I dragged that in. So that's, that's pretty simple. Just drag it in. I found that a lot of the normals that I was baking when I was in Blender baking mesh or baking normals and other textures together, I found that a lot of those normals weren't working well in Unity. And so I learned, after some Googling, I needed to increase the gamma a bit on them. So you'll see me in this process bring up the normals in GIMP and change some values. But after I did that, everything seemed to work fine, and you can see me here putting together all the materials for each one. I organize all my textures in individual folders, so I create the materials in those folders. And what I do to set up the prefab is I'll create a game object, put the game object at 0, 0, and then I'll bring in the mesh, make the mesh a child of that new game object. Then I'll rename the game object, add anything else I need to that model, so like colliders, any animations that are needed, and in some cases there's some udon scripts. So like with the beer taps, there's an udon script. With things like the fire pit and the hot tub, there are particles that are part of those meshes, so it's just like a matter of setting everything up. So under that game object that I make, everything gets set up, I rename it, and then I drag it into my prefabs folder, and then that's it. It's time consuming, it's tedious, especially when you have this amount of meshes in a project. But once you're done, you have something that looks like this. So I'm just gonna show you the completed package. This is the big one. I've made the free one. I made the free one, basically I just exported this out and then brought it into another project and started deleting everything that I didn't want in there. But this is the big pack. You can see everything in here. You can see what I was saying, where I'll create the game object, rename it, and then put the other meshes and everything else that's needed for that mesh underneath it. The hot tub is a good example because the hot tub comes with like a sound effect, a bunch of particles. One of my favorite things in here that I have been using in like every project are these like little house details, outlets, and vents. I want to be doing like more of those. And all these details are just like, they're baked on here. So big fan of those. I really like those. I've been using that on like every project ever since I made each one of them. But yeah, this is the big pack. I'll show you. If you go to prefabs, you can see everything's in like little categories. Go to tables. You have every kind of table here. I'll show you the free one. So this is the free one. Still a lot of stuff. This is like 150 prefabs less, so you only get two of the best beds in my opinion. And yeah, everything's kind of all over the place because I was moving things around to take the pictures, but that's the pack. That's me making it, and if you want it, the link's in the description, and I think that's all I got for you. Bye.